evening, friends. Folks are just rolling in.
Wow.
Hi, our room is filling. Welcome to you all.
That's amazing.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to see folks joining. We're going to give folks a couple of minutes to pile into our moon room here. My name's Emily. I know you all probably know Rosemary, my dear friend, very well. We'll do some introductions in a moment. I love that folks are already hopping into the chat and sending greetings from where you're tuning in from tonight. And
Awesome.
So as you're joining, please just follow along and share with us. You can share just with the host, which is us, but you can also share with everyone. You can pick in the chat who you want to share with, and why not share with everyone where you're tuning in from tonight under this waxing crescent moon in the sign of Pisces. If you have some clear skies, you might get to see a little moon much like this shining over us tonight. So it's so good to see you all. We're going to give folks another minute or two, and if you don't already have a cup of tea or a glass of water with you, I encourage you to fill up your cup now so we can just sit back and enjoy some warm winter time together with a mug of tea, talking about the moon and the stars and the earth and the plants and the things that weave those together. Welcome. We're going to give folks another minute or two. I want to thank you all for sharing a part of your evening with us in this season, with holy days and short days and long nights, winter time. Spending an evening away from our wood stove or away from our family is a big gift. And so you have given us a gift to be with us tonight, and we are so grateful to have you here from all corners of the country and from a couple of other continents too. If you're just hopping in, my name's Emily. This is Rosemary. Please drop in the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from tonight. We would love to hear from you. I will do a very quick bit of Zoom business, and then we will jump into our sacred space, our circle tonight. At the bottom of your screen, you have the option of turning on closed captioning. If that's something that would make tonight's class more accessible for you, I encourage you to do that. Our dear friend Debbie from the Florida School of Holistic Living is moderating behind the scenes for us. Thank you so much, Debbie.
Yeah, thank you.
And you are welcome to drop greetings and thoughts and reflections in the chat tonight. Some of us prefer just to be really present and listen, and the chat can be distracting. So you have the option to turn that chat off too, whichever will make this experience most present and rewarding for you. And at the very bottom of your screen, there is also a button that says Q&A. And so tonight, through Rosemary and I's conversation and sharing, if any questions arise for you, you can drop those in the question and answer section, and we'll leave some time at the end where Debbie will help us curate some answers to your questions. If you're just continuing to join in, welcome. We encourage you to leave a note in the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from. We have this beautiful, not just national, but really global community gathering tonight to share about how sacred the stars can be, especially to those of us that are earth lovers and plant lovers. And so I just want to take a moment now that we have a little business out of the way, and hopefully we have our warm cup of tea or glass of water with us, and we're starting to get settled into the space. And I just want to invite us all to arrive, especially because we are greeting one another over this digital platform. I want to just give ourselves a minute of space to feel the chair or the couch or the floor that is holding us, to feel our feet on the earth as the earth beneath us supports us and grounds us. And I want to give gratitude to all of our family and friends and roommates and beloveds and animal companions that are allowing us to carve out just an hour of time in this winter evening to be here together and to fill our hearts. I want to honor and witness all of the ancestors of mine and of Rosemary's and of all of you who are living up in the star camps, looking down upon us, who have planted some seeds within our hearts and within our human being bodies to be connected to the earth and to the heavens, and to carry forth this ancestral legacy of connection with the earth and the heavens. And I want to call in and thank and honor and give witness and gratitude to all of the plant allies that are in the room with Rosemary and I, and in your room with you, and your office, and your bedroom, and your living room, in the corner of your apartment tonight. The blue lotus, and the chamomile, and the mugwort, and the damiana, and the rose, and the holy basil, and any other plant ally that has been with you tonight, today, this week, this month, in your garden, in your teacup. Those that fill us, that nourish us, that heal us, and that give us breath and that give us inspiration. And I want to think about that moon hanging over us in the sky, whichever time zone and latitude and longitude you're tuning in from tonight. We have this waxing crescent moon in the sign of Pisces that while we're here in Vermont is kind of peeking through the clouds where it can to remind us that it's there. And I think about the elements of the sky and of the earth and the water sign of Pisces and the fire of the candles or the incense that you may have burning right now, and just all of those elements alchemizing together to create us and to create this beautiful world that we walk on, as well as all the neutrons and electrons and whatever other magic I can't even wrap my head around that allows all of us from all these corners of our beautiful planet to gather in this sacred space tonight. So of all these energies and spirits and forces, I invite you to just take in a rich, deep inhale. Maybe let it out with an exhale, along with anything else from your day that you don't want to carry into your evening tonight, and just be present in this moment with all these rich gifts that have allowed us the great gift and blessing of being together tonight. Once again, thank you to all of you for carving out the time tonight to share with us in this very sacred space. I know we are looking at each other through a screen, but it is no less sacred than if we were to be in person around a bonfire on a lakeside, dancing and chanting and singing. And I am so grateful to be with all of you, and also to be here with my dear friend and mentor and teacher and beloved Rosemary Gladstar. I know Rosemary needs a little introduction in the herbal world, but as many of you know, she is considered the fairy godmother of the modern herbal renaissance. And she has been a teacher and a dear friend and mentor of mine for about 20 years now. And we have a special connection of the last few years in that I have moved from down in tropical Florida all the way up here to Arctic Vermont to help carry on a piece of Rosemary's diverse and vast legacy in the herbal world by stewarding the Sage Mountain Botanical Sanctuary. And Rosemary's teaching and legacy and the time we've spent together in the garden over these decades has always had an element of acknowledgement and recognition and honoring of how all of the elements of the earth and the cosmos have woven themselves together in this precious moment, and to give us the opportunity to be as herbalists, for instance, with healing plants, or as gardeners with the beloved green beings in our garden. And so as we are moving into the winter season, and as I and my team are preparing to start our next year-long journey of our moon medicine course, I invited Rosemary to share tonight with me and with all of you, because in our moon medicine course, we derive a lot of inspiration from the moon and the stars. And we also get into a lot of information and knowledge and detail and wisdom of astronomy and astrology and gardening by the moon and medical astrology. But what weaves that all together is the way that the stars can inspire us and can fill our hearts and our spirits. And something that Rosemary and I have been reflecting on a little bit this evening is how shaky and challenging the last few years have been for many of us individually and collectively. And I know for myself personally, and for a lot of those close to me, having a relationship with the cycles of the moon that remain constant no matter what chaos is going on in my life, and can remind me that sometimes energy ebbs and flows and then ebbs and flows again. And even when we're in challenging periods, it's just a phase, and periods of sweetness can return. So one inspiration for me to invite my dear friend and all of you tonight to share was just so that we could be reminded and restored a little bit in our spirit that we have these beautiful influences and forces and energy in the sky, in the heavens, and here on earth with us that we can weave together to nourish that resilience that is so needed in this time, and invoke that inspiration that helps us keep stepping one foot in front of another. So we are here. We are here.
That's so beautiful.
Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you. And so our hope tonight is for Rosemary and I just to share some stories and some experiences with our relationship with the cosmos and the cycles that have been meaningful for us. And we called this class Lunar Living for the Herbalist because so many of you, whether you are a clinical practitioner or a hobby herbalist in your home and you grow a couple rosemary and sage plants at your back door and you cook with them, as Rosemary says, if the herbs are in our heart, then we are an herbalist. We don't need a fancy certificate and letters behind our name to claim that title. And I know for me as a plant lover, my relationship with cycles of the moon and the beautiful stars at night has really enriched my practice of herbalism. So what we hope to share tonight is some of that inspiration, as well as maybe a few practical tips of how the moon influences our work as herbalists, our practice of herbalism, our personal practice. And then since we're here with Rosemary, no night would be complete without a story or two along the way. So as we continue in our conversation tonight, again, feel free to leave some questions for us in the Q&A that you'll find at the bottom, and we'll leave a little bit of space at the end tonight to answer some questions for you.
I just want to thank you, Emily, for just those inspirations when you were calling in all the elements. I hope you all felt it as well, but I just felt like this whole room fill up, with all those star beings and ancient ones and all the elemental forces, because they always come when you call them, right? I think they're waiting to be called by us, by every one of us. And when we just start relating to them, they're present, right? It just takes a little word magic coming forth from us, sometimes a little sprinkle of stardust and herbs, but they do show up. And it's important to remember that, because we're not alone, and because it makes life, even through these most challenging of times, so much more fun. And it brings that element of magic that we all, like as children, all believed in and definitely need to believe in as we grow older. So thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Yeah, I think that what Rosemary just said, that we're not alone. I think if we leave with nothing else from our time together tonight, just to remember that when we walk outside, I think about it as a plant person. When I walk in the forest and I'm walking alone, while those plants are chatting with me and like waving at me, I think about it from an earthly perspective. But then when we expand our awareness into sort of a celestial or cosmic perspective of that too, then I think that sense of support and connection, like especially now in these last few years, when a lot of our connection has been like this through screens, there's been a really vast sense of isolation. And I know for me, reminding myself that I'm not alone because of all these elements and forces that are surrounding us is is such a medicine. It's a medicine that I've needed.
But I think one of the problems that happens is when we look at things, especially when you look up at the sky, and we're taught to see that in our in the three-dimensional way that we have learned to experience life. The stars and the moon and the sun seems like they're so far away, but they're actually not far away at all. You know, it's just that dimension that we were born into. They're actually really close. They're right over our heads, you know. And when we begin to really understand that, which I think we don't understand that through our adult minds. We understand that really through our child minds, right? We understand that we have that kind of understanding when we go back to where we came from the very beginning. And then once we can start to enter that again, we realize how close everything is, and that everything, including those millions of stars above us, are all in relationship to us. It just begins to change that sense that here we are all alone, and so distance from one another, so distance from our ancestors. As Emily was talking about the star camps that many different people in the world believe, and they have different language for it. But when we pass on and become dust or dirt or ash again, we go back to the star beings where we came from. I was actually reading about that today. I was so curious to hear what science had to say about the fact that we all come from stardust, that beautiful, you know, Carl Sagan saying and Joni Baez's song, and there's so much poetry written about it. But even in scientific language, when they're describing the periodic table, they say absolutely, you know, 97% of what we're made from is exactly the same dust that stars are made from. And it's combustion. It's this huge combustion of the stars from millions of years ago. And it makes us, when I just started traveling in that thought and thinking about it, it made me realize really how close we are to our ancestors, you know. And even in the biblical tale, right, in the Bible, where God talks about creating humanity from dust, right? You know, stardust. Anyway, yeah. It's a good way to look at the world, because we are so not alone, and we're so not just insular human beings, two-leggeds walking on the planet. We're so in relationship to everything. And once we recognize that as the young species we are, once we recognize that and begin to mature, we'll really know much better how to clean up our act, right? On every level, and help the planet, which is what she's asking from us right now.
Yeah. And I think, you know, when you mention that we're in relationship to these energies, to these beings, to these forces, to these elements, like that's a reciprocal relationship. You know, like Rosemary said, when we speak, when we call in our ancestors, when we call in the spirits of our plant allies, when we call in these elements, they arrive, right? And it's a reciprocal relationship, and they also are speaking to us. And I think, you know, what you're saying, Rosemary, like the earth is certainly calling for us. And if we can stop and listen, then we as a species, we as two-leggeds can really answer that call and steward and be in right relationship with the planet in a better way. And that reciprocity I'm thinking of in relationship to the moon, for instance, because the phases and the cycles and the ebbs and flow of the moon, that too is a relationship, and it's a relationship that's reciprocal and that has an energy that influences us. So I think about my friends who are nurses in the emergency room or who are paramedics. If any of you tonight in our circle you may be familiar with this, or midwives. Midwives is another. There are certain energies that at the new moon or the full moon influence the human body, as well as other animals in the animal kingdom, in very different ways, and the plants as well too. So, you know, full moon is a time where there are statistically a lot more mamas releasing their babies into the earthbound world through birth. There are also a lot more accidents and a lot more intense experiences in places like an emergency room, or a lot more intense calls to the police station. There's just a heightened energy, this sort of colloquial historical joke about like the moon making us crazy or werewolves, like there is a scientific, physiological, biological explanation for that.
The lunatic energy.
That's right. We get heightened energy. And I mention this because I think on an emotional level and a mental level, on a creative level, on a professional level, that when I can understand that influence of the moon's energies, just the new moon and the full moon, its phases and its cycles, just starting there, then I can have a sense of why last weekend around the new moon, when I was feeling really, really tired, like I wanted a nap. Well, that moon was new, it was dark, it was in its own phase of low energy, and that affected me. And similarly, when the full moon is waxing and rising and that bright moon is out there and I'm feeling like dancing, that's a very real, tangible, scientifically explainable phenomena. It's not just woo-woo that we're making up. It's not just how we feel in a spiritual sense. There is a biological explanation for that. And if I can be aware of that, and if I can build that awareness into the plans that I make, into when I carve out creative time for myself versus when I feel like I have the energy to be a workhorse versus forcing myself against that energy or in contradiction to that energy.
Making our herbal products.
And then, making our medicines. Yeah. As Rosemary said, those same energies influence the plants in our garden. When we dive deep into the study of gardening by the moon, there are lots and lots of layers that I teach about in classes, but one just very simple is to think about the new moon when it's dark and the full moon when it's bright, and how light and gravity influences our plants. And when the moon is dark and the gravity is lower, the gravity of the earth pulls that energy of the plant more into its roots. Yeah. But when that moon is bright and the gravitational force is a little bit bigger, then the energy of our plants rises above the earth into our leaves, into the flowers, stretching up towards that full moon. So
just like us.
Just like us.
Yeah. It's the same.
And thinking about our harvesting and our medicines when they're most potent, aligned with those lunar new moon and full moon phases, is just one little simple way that we can align with these energies and sort of magnetize and work with and integrate their energies. It doesn't mean that if you can only harvest plants on a Tuesday and it happens to be a first quarter moon and whatever sign, like that medicine's not going to be amazing or beautiful or potent. It just means that when we, in our frantic calendar-driven schedule, have the opportunity to let that schedule be guided by the forces of nature and not just by the forces of a clock, we sort of add an extra special element of magic and medicine to it, I think. Don't you think, Rosemary?
Oh, absolutely. Like one example that just popped into my mind is early on when I first started planning the herbal events and stuff, and especially the herbal conferences, especially the women's conferences, I would always plan them around the full moon, right? So that we could have that magnetic, incredible, magical, wild energy that comes from the full moon. But especially with the women's conferences, after a few years of doing that, I decided not to anymore. And it wasn't that it wasn't incredible energy, but it was almost too much, right? It was like, well, especially when you have that many people around, you sort of want it to be a little more sedate. And with the women's conferences, what would happen is that so many women, because of that full moon energy, they would start their cycles even and being around all the other women. So even if their cycles weren't due for 3 weeks, they would be starting. I used to say we'd have to drive up with a tractor load of pads, right, for people. So I actually, even though that wasn't illuminating energy and there was nothing more fun than being out in those full moons doing all those women's circles, because there was already so much energy at those gatherings, I actually started planning them at other times. Just as an organizer, it made life a little easier for me. But yeah, like on those, you know, sometimes it does seem like we're just talking about a magical realm, but actually in a very practical, fundamental way, and ways that can also be described by science, which has its own magical language. The forces of the moon are very real in our lives. And as we become more conscious of them, as Emily was saying, we can just learn to dance with it more. I think that's all. It just brings, it's another way to bring kind of conscious intention to our everyday life. And And in breeding that conscious intention, it also adds an element of fun, and that term magic, which I love so much, just magic is almost, to me, just like you're looking for the miracles that are happening every day in small ways around you. And so working with the lunar energy definitely does that, I would say, in a very, very powerful way, because it's always changing. Like you were saying that as well. It reminds us in our own lives that everything is always changing, so that when you are feeling that fullness, it's not a permanent space. You just want to radiate in it. You want to stand there and really shine and take it all in, and actually go out and dance in that light when you can, because it also is going to wane. It is the normal process of nature. And because it is the normal process of nature, then we have to really trust it's a very, very important process for humans to engage in, that waning, that coming within, that feeling, that need to rest and rejuvenate, so that we can then build the energy again. So yeah, just working with the lunar cycles has been vastly important in my life, I have to say. Yeah, both as an herbalist, really, as a woman, and as a human being, and it reaches into every one of those aspects of my being.
Well, I think when you share that, Rosemary, I'm reflecting on, this is a cycle of nature, and we leave very little room in our common culture for the concept of cycle, for the concept of ebbing and flowing. But I think all of you as humans, as herbalists, as maybe caretakers, we know that if we don't have a period of rest, then we may be pushed into a period of rest, right? Or if we are constantly outputting, like I think about years ago, Rosemary talking about how you can't fill others' teacups if your kettle is empty, something to that effect. And I think one thing that the moon really teaches us is the importance, the necessity of honoring the fact that the energy does ebb and flow, right, in our life and our creativity. And, if we aren't feeling creative, or if we are feeling, tired or what have you, that's not a sentence that's permanent. I love thinking about the phrase, it's just a phase, thinking about the moon and thinking about these cycles in our own life. Because things do shift and do change. We just, like Rosemary said, it's a force of nature, and nature is so ancient. You look at that sort of clock of the earth, and humans have been there for like a minute or two, right, compared to the rest of our planet and other species. And so there's a trust that we need to invest in these forces of nature. So
it took our stardust a little while to get here.
It did take our stardust a good while to get here. And yeah. So I know, Rosemary, that you mentioned as an herbalist and as a human being, that the cycles of the moon has been influential upon you. And I know from being friends with you for a long time that you have lots of anecdotes about different times that a full moon or a moon cycle has an interesting impact. I wonder if you might share a story.
Yeah, they're crowding in my head. Well, I think one example that actually ties into the last example I was just talking about, the Women's Herbal Conference, is this actually happened a number of years ago, a long time ago, but it always stood out to me, maybe because it was one of those first impressions, where the power of the moon, I got to see it work so incredibly on the physical body that it just has stayed with me for such a long time. But I had a really good friend, still a dear friend of mine. Her name is Diana. She's actually named after the goddess of the moon. And she had been on birth control since she was a young girl. And she had been on them for, maybe 10 or 15 years by that time. And she wanted to get off of them. And so she did, she stopped, but then her cycle didn't come. And that's very normal. That happens a lot of the time. It takes the body a long time to find its natural rhythms again, right? And so she went through a period of years where it didn't come. And finally, she was one of my students actually out at the California School of Herbal Studies. Finally, she decided she was going to do a ritual. And Diana was she was an artist, and she was really into ritual. And, so she made a big deal about this. She invited small group of women, and it was on the full moon. It was happening out in the ocean. Can imagine, this was on the Pacific when I was still living on the Pacific coast. And we hiked in about 10 miles, and we're standing in the circle, and she had berries that she put on her head, like red berries. I mean, she just went all out for this. This is back, in the 70s or 80s. So we were really doing things like this. Anyway, the very, very next day, she started her cycle, right? It was that full moon. It was her intention. It was her just reaching up to the moon and the power of her women's circle. And it was like, yeah, I mean, of course, we would all say, right? But it was like, wow, of course. Yeah, that was a pretty powerful one. And I have used the moon energy a lot in my own life, not just the full moon. I mean, when I'm working with people around the moon time, the full moon, it's when it's most radiant and most powerful, but all of the cycles have power and they all bring special gifts. But when you're first learning to work with it, it's almost so powerful when you're using that full moon that it doesn't matter how blind you are, you're going to see, right? So I remember one time I was actually, again, this was a long time ago, I was doing a workshop up in British Columbia, and I had everybody go out into the garden. It's this standard thing. You collect the flowers with intention, make a beautiful tea. We put it out in the moonlight. But what was really unusual about this is the next day we were in a classroom, we were inside a building, but I just called on the powers like you did, and I just felt the magic. And then we passed this bowl around, and literally I felt like we were drinking some like exotic drug, really. It was just moon tea. But I swear I could look around and see that we were all elevating, and I wasn't the only person. It was a group of around 30 or 35 people, of men and women. And really, literally, everybody was feeling like that. We were floating above the ground and drinking this moon tea. Yeah, that was pretty incredible. And I have many other stories. I mean, but yeah, we have a lot to cover.
Well, I think those are really powerful. And I think that, reflecting on your first story, I know a lot of people with wombs in our circle this evening have had experiences of connecting our cycles to the moon time, and some folks, depending on the phase of our wombness, might be bleeding with the new moon. Some might be bleeding with the full moon. But it is by some divine design that our cycle is the same length of time, roughly 28 days, that the cycles of the moon are. And whether we are synced up with the new or the full moon or somewhere in between, that happens really commonly. And I know when I was early in my practice of herbalism and working with young women, whether they had been on birth control or were simply living in a city and experiencing all the endocrine disruptors that are very present and trying to get some regularity and rhythm to their moon cycle, we have all these amazing, beautiful herbs and nutrition and guidance that we can offer them, but simply tracking their menstrual cycle on a moon calendar. I would be astonished. I would give them all these beautiful teas and food, and they would forget the tea after a week, and they wouldn't really like the food I gave or something, but they would stay consistent with the lunar cycle. And within 2 to 3 months, they would go from 15-day or 45-day cycles to 28-day cycles, and like on the day with the new moon or on the day with the full moon, which I think is just really incredible.
I feel like she's just up there shining, radiating down on us and just asking us to pay attention. And to honor her like we would honor anything, I know in the first book I ever wrote, The Herbal Healing for Women, which is still one of my favorite books, actually, but there's a whole chapter on menstruation, and I definitely, really encourage women to follow those moon cycles and to use the moon energy. There's these little tricks that you can do, and working with that moon energy is a big trick.
A big and a simple one. I think that's why I love some of the teachings that we share in moon medicine class and in some of our herbal classes too, because the moon is always outside looking down on us. I think it's just so present and so there, just asking for us, like Rosemary said, to give it some attention, to say hello, to bear it witness. And on your second story, Rosemary, I wanted to know if maybe for folks that aren't familiar with a moon tea or a lunar tea, if we could share a little bit about what you mean by a moon tea.
Oh yeah, it's actually one of my favorite ways to make herbal teas. And, we might say that they're mostly just for, on the etheric level, or that they definitely are not like a flower essence. We might say we use it more for emotional or, manifesting our dreams, but they're actually quite physical as well. Like the flower essences, you're not going to get a lot of chemical constituents drawn into the water, but you get an energetic power in there that has very deep effects on our physical being. So I use them for both ways, by the way. And oftentimes when I'm making medicine for serious health situations, I call on the solar and the lunar energies, because I really want, I also want to be able to give those chemical constituents in the plants, but I also know that the lunar and the solar energy are infusing these herbs that have been in relationship with them since they were born, right? That everything about how these plants grow is in relationship to the sun and the moon and the rain. So a lot of times I'll make those teas and give them as an adjunct part of the formula, because they're addressing issues that we can't see. But you just would take, ideally, you would gather plants fresh if you have them, but I often in the wintertime, I don't have fresh plants here in Vermont, so I'm using dried. And the actual formula is really up to you. You're not necessarily making a triangular formula with your specifics and supportive herbs. There'd be more like what you're drawn to. And the only caveat would be make sure that they're not toxic or poisonous, right? Make sure the plants that you're using are good to ingest. And I like to put them in a nice clear glass bowl, and then just expose them to the moon, to any of the phases of the moon. It doesn't have to be the full moon, but if you've never done this before, I recommend the first one you do to do it in the full moon. Like with anything that we do, eating and going to bed and waking up, it's always good to put your intention into it, just a moment of intention, and then to just, or gratitude if you don't have an intention. Gratitude and intention are really good things for us to practice every day. And then just put it out in the moonlight. If it's a summer and you have a lot of insects that fly at night, you'll want to cover it with something. It could be a piece of cheesecloth or a little glass, just to keep the bugs out. Otherwise, I like to just set it and you let it infuse in the moon. And then the next morning you want to strain it and just drink it that way. You don't want to heat it or anything. It's that simple. And those, as I said, those drinks can be very powerful. And can I tell one more story of a moment? Yeah. This is probably more something not to do than to do, but many, many years ago, when I was living alone and ready for a relationship, I decided I knew what I wanted. And I put so much intention into this moon tea. I was making a lunar tea because I wanted the magic of the moon. And I'd done that list, everything I wanted. I wanted him to love animals and love children and be gentle and kind and love plants and sing, play guitar and sing. It was a beautiful long list of wonderful things. And then I put a crystal in my tea, my lunar tea. I collected the herbs from my garden with that intention of this tea, and I put it out in the moonlight and I drank that tea. It was a full moon. And exactly one full moon later, I met Daniel, who was my life partner for around 10 years. We had a really good friendship, but I'd left one thing out very important, was that he would love me back. So that's why I say, we never really know what we need or want. So those kinds of teas probably aren't the best for us to make, but it was pretty amazing. I remember like exactly one full moon later, we drove up to herb school because this is when we first started the school, and he was the caretaker there. And I went, aha, he played music. He had kids, he loved animals. He was a very good friend.
Calling in that intention. That's some full moon magic right there.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. Yeah, she works her magic on us, doesn't she? This is my Halloween mask. I always used to go as the moon goddess on Halloween.
I love that.
I know.
That's so good.
I know, it's a good one. I had a cape of stars. And they just drift through the night.
I love this. Thanks for sharing about the moon tea. A lot of you have probably made a sun tea. So this is very much like a moon tea. And even, in the middle of winter here in a place like Vermont, there's, use a safe container. Don't use some glass that's going to freeze and find it shattered in the morning, something like that. But just, leave it out there, let those ice crystals work their magic, and then bring it inside and let it thaw. A moon popsicle. I love this idea.
A moonsicle.
And I've also done it like on a windowsill that a moon shines in, something like that. So you can modify and be creative depending on the climate and where you live. But so such a simple way to connect with the energy and have the moon's energy kind of infuse itself into our medicines.
Well, I think it's an invitation to those energies, right, that we're a part of. And so when we do these kinds of things, they feed us for certain, but they're also feeding those stellar energies, they are feeding that relationship. And so that, I think, is partly what it becomes so potentized, because that moonlight just beams in. It's like when we go out and we tip our faces up to the moon and we just adore her and love her. She tips right back at us, and shines her brilliant light on us. And it's just a one-on-one heartful sharing out there in the moonlight with the moon.
Some of you in our circle tonight wear, and some of you may have noticed, the necklace that Rosemary and I are wearing, which was a symbol of the herbal tradition and a lineage of Rosemary's students, honoring that she would honor with her apprentices as we completed our journeys with her, our circles with her. And I know I get asked about it all the time and complimented by it at the weirdest places, like the hardware store and the gas station, people that I wouldn't think would have any connection with the moon. It's always reminding me that we all have a connection with the moon, no matter who we are and where we are. And so before our class tonight, we had a couple people just wrote and asked, what's that moon necklace about that all you people wear? So I know some of the folks that joined us in circle tonight are a part of this special circle as well. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the moon necklace.
Yeah, I would love to. It's actually very special. I think so. About maybe it's been 36 years ago now, when I held my very first apprentice program. I was still living in California at that time at the herb school. So it was the first. I'd been teaching a long time, but I hadn't held an apprentice program where students were coming and just studying with me over a long period of time. And there was a wonderful student in that class named Donna DeTerra, and she went on to start her own apprentice programs. She went on to teach and later to start her own apprentice programs. And I had then moved to Vermont. And she wrote to me and said, I am graduating my first class of apprentices, and I would love for you to come and be with my students. Well, I took that as such an honor, because I was seeing, even though I was quite young at that time, I was seeing the lineage. My grandmother had taught me, and Juliet, my elders, had taught me. And then I had taught this young woman, and this one young woman was now teaching. And because she lived near Sonoma County, where my parents still were, it was an easy trip for me. But I planned my trip out to go and participate in the graduation. And at the end, she gave me a little box. And I opened the box, and there was a moon in that box. She gave me it as a gift. The minute I saw that moon, it was like I saw this entire story, and it wasn't like I thought about it. It just came to me. And it was the moon is carved from bone. And it immediately came to me that how herbalism is passed down through the bones and the bloods of our ancestors. And we can track it all the way back, really all the way back through generations upon generations. And it also, I fell into that moon, and the moon was like, it's how herbalism works in the healing realm. So, each system of healing is working on many, many different ways. But herbalism, it's a lot about intuition and trust, and trusting the body. It's a lot about cycles. We were talking about that. It's a lot about, health is not a static thing, either is illness. It's a cyclic thing. And so I saw that, and I saw herbalists, like, our main thing is to empower people, right? And to teach and to educate and to share knowledge. And to me, that just is so much how the moon is. It's much more of an intuitive than it is an actual. Yes, there are herbs that we know work certain ways, sort of, right? But they work very differently on everybody. It's just. And so the moon was holding all of that for me. And and I just, so after that class, I started, I went back to Vermont, and every apprentice program that I graduated, which was one a year for what, 30 something years, 34 years, I gave the moons to. And then what was so beautiful is they started like being seen everywhere, right? I remember one time I went down to Belize. I was on a beach there. I was actually leading one of our plant lovers groups. And somebody came up and went, oh my God, there was somebody here a week ago with the moons on. And then other herbalists started giving them to their students, right? So it's become like a kind of a universal symbol. And unfortunately, the elder man, the man now who's an elder, who's been carving them, I'm not sure how much longer he's going to be able to do it. You know, he's been putting out the information that get your orders in, I can only carve so many. But yeah, and so, and there are people now, like I know Jean's Greens, sells them. So if people want to buy them, you can also get them, which I think is totally appropriate. It's always nice to have them handed down to you by your teacher. But I think it's also, if that hasn't happened in your tradition, I think having one it's a really good symbol for us. I know I've worn this moon. I've had to change them because, they kind of wear out after 20 years or something, or the strings break or whatever. But I feel naked without it. It's such a part of just wearing it. I just feel whole, I think. And I feel my attachment, to the moon goddess too. It's a constant reminder to me.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add to that?
I just want to thank Rosemary for sharing that, because it's such a special, powerful symbol and meaningful gift for all of us, whether we studied with Rosemary directly or received it from a teacher in Rosemary's lineage, or just, had that connection to it. I think it's such a, and that symbol of the study and practice of herbalism, as well as that relationship that we have with nature, honoring nature, learning from nature, whether it is the earth or the sky, and all of the weaving together, that being in our bones and in our blood, and passed down ancestors to ancestors. Even if our grandmother by blood or great grandmother, if there was a gap in that passing down of knowledge, if there was, by transition and movement or culture, sometimes our lineage is not complete, but we have these spiritual ancestors that still hold it complete for us. And we are reclaiming these teachings and these practices for our ancestors that came before us. So I think it's just so powerful, Rosemary.
Yeah.
So
it's pretty beautiful.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So we have a minute or two for a question or two. And I want to just thank you all again for tuning in tonight, being a part of our winter evening in this special circle. And I know we have a couple of questions that have come through. Debbie, would you mind sharing a question with Rosemary and I so we can offer some reflections?
Sure. One question is from Allison. Have you noticed a difference in plants and their medicine if you plant, care for, and harvest them going along with the moon cycles versus not doing so? I'm thinking of experimenting with going with and against the flow and seeing what differences I notice. And she's talking about planting on a waxing moon and harvesting on a full moon and harvesting on a new moon, or vice versa. Which way you recommend?
That's a great question, Allison. I have some initial thoughts, and then I'll let Rosemary chime in some. I, again, think that if our lives are such that we can only garden on Tuesdays, but we can still get in our gardens, then that, does not diminish the medicine any way, shape, or form. I recently just wrote an article that will be shared in a couple of days that I'm going to call something like From Black Thumb to Green Thumb. And so when I was growing up, I did a lot of gardening with my grandfather, who was a farmer, but I didn't plant a lot of seeds. He would plant the seeds, or we would get starter plants from other gardeners and farmers in our community. And in my late teens, early 20s, I was really diving into herbalism, and I wanted to grow things that I couldn't find little baby starter plants for to put in my garden. So I got a bunch of seeds from a bunch of great, amazing companies and started to plant all these seeds. And then none of them grew. And I felt so disheartened. I was like, I can't call myself a herbalist, much less a gardener, if I'm planting all these seeds and none of them are sprouting? And I made several more attempts season after season. I was really committed. And I still was having some inconsistent luck with seed germination in particular. I could keep a plant alive. I could make it grow huge and vibrant and beautiful. I just couldn't get those seeds started. And around that time, I found a book called Planetary Planting by Louise Riotti at a thrift store for $2 in like the most obscure place in the thrift store. It wasn't with the books. It was with like the oversized coats or something. It was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but it was the right place for me. And I began to read that book, which spoke to the concept of gardening by the moon, by the phases of the moon, as well as looking at lunar signs and elemental energies of seasons, and very simple teachings as well as very complex ones. And so in that book were referenced several studies where calendula seeds were studied using both moon phases and moon signs in their germination process. And what these horticulturists, I assume, botanists discovered was that planting these calendula seeds on certain phases of the moon or on certain zodiac signs that the moon was traveling through would influence how quickly they germinated, the percentage of which the seeds germinated at all. And then when those little baby seedlings were transplanted to larger pots, how many of them survived the transplant. The study also evaluated at what day those plants bloomed, and some bloomed earlier that were started under certain moon phases, and some bloomed later, and some had 10 times as many blooms if they were planted under a certain moon. And so it was just this fascinating thing for me, because as many of you know, my father, rest his soul in the star camps, was an astronomy professor, and he was also a botany professor. So my love of the plants and the planets comes very honestly. And I was raised studying with this scientist. And so some of these concepts of like gardening by the moon, for instance, initially I might be a little skeptical or resistant. And I really needed some validation, like studies like this one, to let my linear mind soften to some of these very validated teachings about the moon and its influence on plants. So from that book, I began to modify my seed planting and followed the moon signs. And immediately my confidence as a gardener and an herbalist was restored, because by miracle, my seeds were sprouting when they hadn't previously, and they were surviving. And so I would say that it's certainly, that's a bit of an honest story. Not everyone has that same success, but certainly there has been for me in the gardening sense, honoring that relationship and integrating it, the relationship of the sky and the earth, has really enhanced my gardening, as well as improved my yield in my harvest. And then I think when we align the days and the moons that we harvest our medicine under, we can just tap into that layer of subtle energy that the moon is offering us in its phases, whether it's full or new. And that's a great question, Allison. And I feel like I gave an abbreviated answer, because I could talk about this all night and day and season and year, which is a good segue for a brief plug for our moon medicine class, which starts at winter solstice. And gardening by the moon is a big section of what we cover in that class. We really are seeking to weave together astronomy and astrology, to weave together some of the emotional, spiritual, inspirational parts of these relationships, as well as the practical parts of them, in a year-long course where we meet every season. We have an ongoing discussion group, and we have a new lesson every new moon and full moon. And I invited Rosemary to kind of have this opening to our season of this class enrollment starting, because these anecdotes and stories and concepts that we've shared tonight are why this course that I teach every year is so meaningful to me, and also so very practical and influential in my life as a human being, for my heart, for my creativity, for my work, and also for my relationship with the plants and weaving it together. So We are coming short on our time tonight. So I just want to offer that Debbie, thank you, has added to the chat a link for moonmedicine.org. We have written down some of the questions that came through the Q&A tonight. So if you did not have a chance to get all of your questions answered, we'll be sending out some additional correspondence in the next few days, and we'll make sure to include answers to those questions in the next few days as best as possible. And chances are a lot of those questions will also be covered in our course if you opt to join us for that journey. In addition to the moon and the planets and the plants being something that has been so imbued upon my heart, thanks to my relationship with Rosemary, so has the relationship or the practice of using our voice to call to the plants and to the elements, not just through speaking and writing, but also through song, as many of my students well know. And so I wanted to, Rosemary and I wanted to invite you to sing a song with us in closing, a song called Sanctuary, which invites in just the opportunity for us to be reminded of the path of service that we all walk upon to this earth and to the elements, to the stardust that makes all of us, and to the ancestors that are, we are their prayers and we are walking footsteps along their path. And so I can imagine and hear all of you singing in the herb choir out there across the electrons. So we certainly invite you to sing along with us. Maybe we can sing it through 2 times. So if it's new to you the first time, you can try to chime in the second time. This is a song that I first learned actually at church camp as a child. And then when I came to herb camp at Rosemary Sage Mountain, I was delighted to hear the song again in a new form. And if you're familiar with the song, I hope that you will join us and we can offer this as a closing prayer to all of those ancestors and plant allies and elements that have been a part of our circle tonight.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. So yeah, let you start. I'll join.
Earth, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, and in thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Y'all sound wonderful. Earth, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, and in thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I look forward to being with you again really soon. Happy moon gazing, everyone. Many blessings.